Hello, 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 hello. Lots of hellos today. Welcome to this particular session, the first session of a series, actually, around all things Google Analytics, which you probably know, to be fair, because you all can read, and you read the landing pages, and that's, of course, naturally why you are here. Now, it's a particularly special one for me, Aidan, those of you who haven't encountered me before, because I'm joined for the first time by my lovely partner in crime, who of course is Jill. Jill, give us a wave. Let us know you're alive. Hey. Jill is going to be leading the vast majority of this particular webinar around getting your house in order, setting up your Google Analytics account. And indeed, thank you very much in advance, of course, for all the questions that you provided. There are lots of questions already. And indeed, of course, as I would expect as usual, lots of questions coming in via the YouTube audience as well. But indeed, we are live together talking about Google Analytics for the next hour here at Semrush, and it's our great pleasure to welcome you. Before we do anything at all, before we jump into Jill's awesome presentation, care of us at the Colouring In department, a few things kind of came up quite repetitively in the questions that we just want to clarify. Now, Jill in this session is going to talk a lot about how accounts are set up, as we said, and indeed how really you can get your house in order as we like to think about it. That will become clear why we're describing it like that throughout Jill's talk, which is either amazing for your eyeballs or bad for your eyeballs, depending on how much color you like. But a lot of you are asking questions about things like event tracking, about things like UTM codes, about things like what are the best metrics to use for Google Analytics. And the questions, of course, are amazing, and we'll get to most of them in the series, but we'll try and pack as many into this particular session as well as we possibly can. Most of the answering of questions will come at the end of Jill's presentation, of course, from you, the YouTube audience, and indeed from, of course, the forum on the landing pages as well, and from broader social media, actually, that we'll be keeping an eye on throughout the talk. So if you do have questions about what Jill is saying, and you should have questions about what Jill is saying because it's cool, frankly, if I do say so myself, then do please bring them to the table and we'll try and answer them as best as we possibly can, okay? So hello to absolutely everybody, and indeed, Jill, tell us a bit about what you're going to be talking about today, if you would be so kind. Before you launch into the talk, I want everyone to know, hey, what does the roadmap look like for the next, I suppose, 45 minutes to an hour of their lives?
Okay, so I am going to, because there's a lot, so if we just set the scene as you have very kindly done, Aidan. Analytics is like a bit of a deep, dark wood, and we're not going to go all the way in. We're just going to go through some of the key points. The main ones being just making sure that your account setup is correct, and we've got a model to explain that. And we're going to pick up on things where, out of all the audits that I've done, and I've done many, and out of all the people that we've taught, of which there have been many, there are common themes of mistakes or things that just weren't turned on that can really ruin your data. And you don't want that. You don't want bad data. You want clean data, because that's the report that you're looking at to work out where your investment's going on, what's happening. So we're just going to touch on some of the main bits. As you mentioned, because it is such a vast topic, there are some things that I'm not going to touch on, because we're going to do that in session 2 and session 3, because, you know, it's a 1-hour webinar. There's only so much we can pack in, and I'm going to try and squeeze in some of the questions into the deck because people have kindly submitted those before. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jill. That is what the run of play ultimately looks like, and I can see the YouTube audience are kind of ramping up in the background at the moment, which is pretty cool. But as Jill says, we're going to focus on the things that are really issues that we've seen before, and not really through experience, I guess, more than anything else. And the idea and why we're doing it the way we're doing it is to try and help you, I suppose, solve problems before the problems actually happen to you. Because clients and friends and colleagues in the past, and indeed all tools are like this, they produce stumbling blocks even for the most seasoned professional, I think. And there's real expectation for us now in marketing to measure everything. And you can't measure really if the fundamentals aren't in place. So with that, and without further ado, I suppose, I want to pass you over to the inimitable, the incredible Jill Quick, for the next period in time. And indeed, of course, I'll be lurking in the background, making sure your questions go answered. Enjoy the talk. Jill, please take it away.
Thank you very much. And let's hope that this all works now to share the screen. And then we can get started. Cool. So as we've just discussed, this is the Colouring in Department's first bootcamp for GA account setup. Now, just to kind of set the scene a little bit, I know we alluded at the very beginning, I believe that Google Analytics, or any analytics platform for that matter, deserves the same amount of respect and time to set up a measurement strategy. If you think about the time invested for a CRM or a new website build, or even just starting a new social media strategy or an SEO strategy or whatever, you have to take the time to evaluate where you are now, and then work out the process to where you need to be for your business and where you are in the questions that you want to answer, and then document it. And one of the really good things one of the things that I'm very good at is documentation and processes. And we've got templates that will help you get that solid foundation. Because if you have a solid foundation, especially in Google Analytics, then you will just have the road to success. But there is no real formal training or formal official training in Google Analytics. And because of that, you can never really assume that it's been done correctly, or the person who set it up knew what they were doing. So it's just very, very important to make sure that it is all sound as a pound, as they say. Now, I love this quote, and if you've heard me talk or read some of the content that I've written, I repeat this a lot because it pretty much sums everything up that you need to know about Google Analytics. Without data, you are just another person with an opinion. People are starting to ask questions now, whether it's your agencies, your boss, or people that you work for. They want to know, hey, if I give you some money, if I employ you to do something, what do I get back in return? Now, analytics is amazing, and when you've got your account set up, it's wonderful, but data is still a proxy for people. You still need to bring in the art side of marketing as well to make sure that this works. So I like to think of Google Analytics as almost a blueprint to a house. You still need to bring in a decorator to make it look pretty and design it to the way that you want it to be for your particular business. Now, most people do this. They log into their analytics, they see if the line goes up, and they're like, woohoo, the line's going up, amazing. Or the line's going down, and you feel like you want to just crawl into a little hole. The whole point about being data driven is that we're no longer the revenue takers, we're the revenue makers. And data should be a catalyst for you to do something. You should be able to look at a clean report, and we'll go into what makes your report clean in a second, and make actions on those particular points. So how does it all work? So Google Analytics has been around for a very long time. If my memory serves me correctly, because I'm quite old, I think it's 2005 when Google bought Urchin and launched Google Analytics and gave it to free. And it's now 2018 and we still don't really know how to use it because there's no formal training. Now, at the end of the day, it's just a bit of code. It's just a little bit of code that you put on your website or your app, and you say, hey, Google, would you be so kind as to track the visitors that come to my particular website? Now, this is where it's genius and also a bit of a curse. The fact that it's a bit of software means that it's a bit of software. There's no human behind this. There's default settings, and default settings do not work for everybody. In fact, I don't think they work for anybody, because everybody's business is totally unique and totally individual. You're all your own unique, special little snowflake. So you have to modify your settings to get the information that you want. And this is pretty much what happens if you just rely on the default settings. You get a crap in, crap out kind of situation. If you have a bad configuration of your analytics tools, then all the data that you're using, all the data that you're reporting on is going to be flawed. It might be lying to you. It might not be correct. And that's the report that we're using to base all of our decisions on, which is really not cool. So essentially, this is the process that Google is working behind the scenes so that when you log into that report, you see the information. So you give the code to Google and you go, hey, Google, please collect the visitors, the information of people on this particular website. Now, based on those admin settings, your configuration settings, your own unique configuration settings, it's going to start to process that data for you to then go in and report on. And that's why it's so important to get the fundamentals, the baseline of where you are now, because if there's something's gone wrong in the configuration or collection part, Google is going to be processing data that isn't very good for you. And therefore, when you log into the reporting interface, it's all going to be wrong and you'll be wiping tears off your keyboards. Now, an example of how you can tweak that configuration, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail in a second, are with filters. And an example would be, because this came into one of the questions we had on our Google Doc, so thank you very much for submitting this question. You don't want to count staff members in your report. Now, I made this mistake. Around about 2007, I worked for a big company, 4,000 staff, and anybody that clicked a browser, our website would pop open. So our bounce rate was really high because obviously people didn't want our website. They wanted to go to Google or whatever website they were going to. We also had a problem where membership and sales and customer services were all using the website. So we had all these visitors and kept wondering, why the hell are they not converting? And then I found out about filters and I was like, we should have filtered those out with the IP address. Now, one of the questions that we had was, I'm on a laptop and I work very remotely. Like, how do I do this? This is only going to work when you know the exact IP address for your particular company. So if I was to be in Starbucks and working, just for me, you wouldn't be able to filter that out. This is for, we're based in our office here in London and I know the IP address for my particular company. I can exclude that traffic. I might even look at like agencies or people that I know are going to be working on our website a lot and exclude those as well. But for individuals, like if me and Aidan are working off site, I'm not going to worry too much about that odd one employee. It gets to be more of an issue when you have lots of employees and lots of businesses working on your actual website. Now, the Google Analytics lingo, the data model that they have, and this is really important to mention, and we will go into this in much more detail in session 2 and 3. Google will use terminology like users. Now, these are visitors that come to your website, and they have sessions. Now, these sessions are visits, and within each of these sessions, they will interact with your website, and Google is going to log that as a hit. Now, the thing to be very, very clear about is, we know that it's the user that converts, but in analytics, they calculate your conversion rates based on sessions and not users. And I've seen mistakes where people have reports and they are counting sessions as users, and that isn't correct. You know, I'm one person, one user. I came to the Semrush website today, so I'm one user, but I visited the website 3 times today. And each time that I was on that website, I was interacting with the website and doing something, and Google's going to be recording it. So it's just important to understand the difference between a user and a session. And I'm going to mention this again in the property settings, because you may want to tinker with your default settings to change the session timeout. There are 4 main reporting areas into Google Analytics, and I always remember learning Google Analytics, and it felt like I was learning to type again. You know, when you lose the letters and you can't find the letters on the keyboard, and you'll find people just clicking through Google Analytics reports to try and find the answer. It's pretty much grouped into these 4 areas, and all the answers for who's going to your website will always sit into audience. So in this area, you'll find out, are they male or female, their demographics, what mobile device, the cities that they're coming from. But there's some things you have to do in your admin settings to make sure you get that data. You've then got the acquisition reports, and that's going to tell you all the answers to how are they getting there. Is it SEO? Is it PPC? What about email? What about social media? Behavior, well, what do they do when they're there? So the content pages that they're looking at, are they interacting with things? And we'll touch on event tracking in session 3, and we'll loop back to those questions at the end with Aidan. And then we've got conversions, which I fondly refer to as, am I still in a their job, because at the end of the day, marketing's role is to grow a business and keep our customers and get more customers. And this is where in the admin settings, you have to tell Google what's important to you. There are tens and tens of millions of people that are using Google Analytics. It is not a mind reader. It doesn't know what a conversion is to you. So we have to do the thinking behind that. Now, to help explain your admin settings, I came up with something called the house model, because it fried my little mind when I was trying to understand the account setup. And with all the audits that I've done, and probably the last 50 audits I've done in the last year, this has been one of the first problems with the data being inconsistent and people not being able to get the data that they need, because you just don't know what you don't know. So if you think about your admin settings, so when you look at the bottom left, the little toggle, and you go to like a white screen and there's 3 different columns, these are your account properties and views, and there's an impact on the data depending on which column you are in. So if we think about our websites as a house, so here's your gorgeous house and you have an account. Think of that account level as the roof of your property. Now, you will be assigned an account number. So hypothetically, we're going to go with UA12345. And anything that you do at account level, anything that you do at that level settings is going to impact the entire house, because it's your roof. If you take a hole out of it, it's going to start leaking. So this is where you're going to have all your websites and apps are going to sit underneath your roof. You've then got a property, which I like to refer to as a floor. So if you have a website, then you will be given a tracking ID that's associated to your account. So if you have a website, it'll then be UA12345-1. And that's the code that you're going to give to Google Analytics onto your website to say, please start tracking this particular floor. Now, anything that you do at property level will affect your windows, and windows are a way for you to look into your floor and see what people are doing. So we obviously, as marketeers, we want to bring visitors to our house. We want to party, we want to entertain them, we want them to sit down and read content and have a cup of tea and hopefully leave doing some sort of profitable customer interaction. So if we think of these view levels, and Google will default to 1 view level per property, this is where we can modify our settings even further. So when I look through that window, which sounds like a bit of a stalker now I'm thinking about it, squeaking through people's windows to see what people are doing, I can then understand and report on what people are doing. Now, when I talk about our windows, the things that make your views work are filters. So I'd like you to think of filters as drapes and blinds. They're just a way, if you imagine having a bare window, if you start adding curtains and plantation blinds and stickers, it's going to skew what I can see. It's going to modify how I can see that data on that particular property, or in this house model case, on that particular floor. Now, Google actually recommends that you should have 3 views per property, so 3 windows per floor. So when I do an audit, this is generally the case that most people just have the 1 window. Now, Google recommend that you have 3, the first one being a raw view. So just think of this as a backup folder. If I look through this window, it's a bare glass window. I'm going to see everything. I'm going to see all of the mess, the spam, the real traffic, the staff traffic, everything. But it means that if anything goes wrong in another view, I've got a backup. I've got some saving grace behind me to go in and dig out some data if I so wish. You then have a test view. I like to call this don't break it, because I have broken things before. I have added a filter and I added an extra full stop and it trashed my data. I created a goal and it didn't work. If you do this in your test view and something doesn't work, like a goal or a filter, that's cool beans, because it's a test view. Think of how you do a test staging website page and you get it signed off and then you make it go live. It's exactly the same with our views in analytics that you have a staging kind of testing environment to make sure that things are working. And when you're happy with the data that's coming into that report, you then move it over or roll it over into your reporting view, which is the view that you're going to be using as your main report to show your boss or your own company or whatever the data, to pull insights, to build reports and show all of your glorious work. So when we start thinking about our houses and these windows that we've got, the filters, the drapes and blinds, this is where we can really start to modify the data. And I see a lot of common mistakes in filters, that they've either got the right filters but in the wrong order, or they did different ones. And it's like, again, you don't know what you don't know. So if we think of it as the drapes and blinds, that depending on what it is that you want to see, and that's down for you guys to think how you want to modify that data. But there's two different types that you can use. We've got a predefined filter or a custom filter, and these are available in every single view in Google Analytics. So if we start with the predefined filters, these are small but powerful filters that GA have made available, which kind of reduces the effort in filter creation. So a classic example for this is going to be, how do I remove people from my current company? So it wants to understand, hey, what's the source? Is it include or exclude? And how am I supposed to know what that source is? So if this was going to be our removing staff, then it would look like, please exclude the traffic from the IP address and then the name, the number of that IP address, so that I can actually go in, have a look in my window, and I don't see the barman, I just see all of my visitors and my customers and see what they're doing. So they're very, very powerful, but they only really work for very, very basic things. That's when you have to move in to the custom filters. And this is where we seriously power up, guys. But with any power comes some tricky problems. They are a little bit more tricksy because you have to use pretty much regular expression, or there's just a few more parameters that we have available to us. If you want to know more about different types of filters, there's an absolutely amazing resource from Lunametrics. If you just Google basic GA filters for every site, Lunametrics, they've got a whole list of metrics with the regular expression attached to it so that you can add these, and it's still very, very valid for today. So go and check that out. But some examples of filters and why you would need them. One that I've seen multiple times, because we're all here to create content, especially when you're talking about SEO, you're trying to get people to rank for certain pages. It's a computer program, and Google will record whatever that URL is at the time of a visitor's interaction. Now, when you have like a site search, and you can type into a browser and go, I can't be bothered to look through the navigation, I'm just going to type in dresses. That query string will appear in your behavior reports. And I had this with a client where she said, do you know what, Jill, I've got 400 pages on my website. Yeah, when I go into the behavior content report, I've got like 1,200, and I have no idea why, but it looks like they're all going to the same like blog pages. So she was manually counting them, and she was spending 4 days a month doing this. And I was like, honey, I'm going to save you a load of time. There's a filter that we add. As soon as we add it from today, it's going to remove the query string. So your reports are going to be nice and tidy. Now, let's say I want to create a window where I only want to look at a subdomain. Then I can create a filter to only include traffic from a certain host name. Or I might want to do it for countries. We've done this for the colouring department. I've got a window for the UK. I've got a window for the States. I've got a window for Australia, etc., etc. Spam filters are another one. If you feel like some of your data may be a little bit off. So if we think of our users as little visitors, imagine some of them being fake cardboard cutouts. Google is counting them as a person, but that man ain't real. That's not a real person. And spam can come in the form of fake bots crawling your site and shoving a load of rubbish into your account. Language spam. I think there was one for secret.google that came up as a language that doesn't exist. You'll need to do an audit. This is why that evaluation is really, really important, for you to dig in and identify sources that are sending you traffic that maybe are not really real traffic. Another one that we have is adding a trailing slash to URLs. And again, this is to tidy up that content report that I want to look at. For my site at the moment, we use a trailing slash at the end of our URLs, but websites are really clever now that if you went to one of my pages without the trailing slash, it still sends you to the page, but Google's recording that without the URL and therefore thinks it's 2 pages, and it's not 2 pages, it's 1 page. So these are just some very high level points to show you how you can clean up that data to make sure that you see just exactly what you want to see. Now, the main thing that you need to think about when it comes to filters, you can test filters, and you absolutely should test filters in a testing view, but you need at least 7 days worth of data. And there are some things that it will not do the verify this filter option, and that will be down to anything that's geo-based. So you would have to know roughly, I don't know, let's say you've got 1,000 people that come from America, and you do the it in your test view, and you can do one to say only show me people from the United States, and there's about 1,000 people in there, then you can kind of go, yeah, I think this works. But for other things, it will show you that verification. So if we think about our drapes and blinds, you need to remember, and this is really, really important, when I do audits, I'll either see they were the right kind of filters, but they were put in the wrong order. So there's an option in your view settings in each window that says assign filter order, because filters are applied in the order that you assign them. One filter's output is the next filter's input. And you have to remember, why are you doing it in the first place? Like, I want to isolate traffic in the United Kingdom because I want to see how that market is working for us. And I don't want to count my dev site. I don't want to count staff members, that kind of thing. So you've got to make sure that there's a reason for you to do this in the first instance. So if we can kind of get our heads around the roof and the floors and the windows, let's walk through some typical houses. So the first one being a normal basic house, you have one website. That would mean you would have one roof, UA 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and underneath that roof, you have one floor for one property. And we're going to do best practice Google Analytics and have 3 windows, which is going to be my raw, my test, and the one that I'm going to use to report in. So for some of you, you're going to have a bungalow, or for my American friends, I got told you call this a ranch. I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe we can have that in the comments later. But that's cool. You've just got your one site. You've then got people that have brands with multiple websites that absolutely sit independent of each other. So if this was the case that we have a separate website for a different business, which is for a conference, and we've got another one for an app, whatever, same account settings, but then we've just got UA 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 -1, -2, -3, because as a company, you can own several businesses that all have their own unique domains, and visitors to these websites are tracked separately to each other, but they still live under the same roof. The company still owns them. You don't have to create lots of houses. You could just create one house that might turn into a townhouse or a skyscraper, depends how the business is growing. And then finally, and this came up in one of the questions, we got asked on our Google Docs, how do you create goals that track across different domains? Well, my dear, you need to do something called cross-domain tracking. When you have an ecosystem, and I see this a lot with the e-commerce reviews that I've been doing recently. If the user goes to a website and the domains shift to subdomains and main domains, but the skin's the same, the website looks identical, and the user probably doesn't even realize that when they land on the website and then want to go to the buy button, they go to shop.website.com, and then they go to create an account and they do account.website.com. If you do the previous slide, if you do the multiple floors, the problem is you can't build goals on another property. Like, if it is a floor, I can't see through concrete. I can't punch a hole through somebody else's property and grab that data. So what you need to do when you want to understand that full ecosystem of people moving through these different subdomains, or maybe you are using a third-party tool for lead pages or campaign pages. I've seen this here where they've got like a little CDAIM. You would do cross-domain tracking for this. And essentially you're saying to Google, look, I know in normal circumstances, these are separate domains and we would have them as separate floors, but I really need to see that full customer journey. So I'm going to give you one property code across all domains because I want to track everything. And then you would rinse and repeat your 3 windows, and you can create a window for the shop if you want, one for the account, one for the website, etc., etc. So you've got your house in order, and that's been one of the number one issues I've had when I go into an account. Somebody should have had cross-domain tracking and they didn't. Somebody had several houses and they should have had one. So it's just making sure that depending on your ecosystem that you've got the right house in order. We're now going to dive into some of the settings. Now, there's a lot in here, and we will pick up on some of the settings because we'd be here for all day, to be honest. I spend 3 hours going through this when I do this as a course. So I'm just going to pick up the top ones and the issues that I've seen when it comes to the admin setup. One of the first one being, who has got access to your account? Now, user management can be assigned across account, so they see the entire house, or just one floor or a window. Now, when I've done reviews in the past, you get to see people that used to work for you that don't work for you anymore, yet they still have access to your data, or agencies that used to work for you, but you sacked them and you're working with somebody else and they still have access to your data. So it's worth just having a quick review to see, has everybody got keys to the house that should have keys, and do we need to take the keys off people that shouldn't really be there? Now, there are different types of user access. So when you are asking for access, you have got manage users. This is godlike access. This means that you can give the power to people and you can take it away if you want as well. Ideally, you would have more than one person have manage user access. This has come up about 20% of the times that I've done an audit, that one person had manage user access and they don't work for the company anymore, and they had to pay them an extortionate amount of money to get access granted again, which is not ideal. You then have edit. So edit means that I can't give the power to anybody, but I can create a window, I can create a view, and I can see all the data and report on. So some people don't need to have full access. You then got collaborate. So this is where if I create, let's say a segment, and I wanted to share it with Aidan, he can only see it if he has collaboration access. Otherwise, he's going to be like, Jill, what are you talking about? I can't see anything. And then right at the bottom, which is the one that I generally feel is the default one, where you ask for access and they give you read and analyze, you can log into the reporting interface and you can have a look at the data and manipulate the data. But when you go to admin, you see nothing. You don't see any of the settings. And I think this is where some of the issues crop up, because the people that are using the tool don't have access to like how the car's made, how the house is made, the kind of nitty gritty details. So just have a little bit of a review on there. The next thing is to think about your property settings. Now, there are 2 toggles on here that I really think people should have. The first one is to turn a toggle on called Enable Demographics and Interest Reports. Within that audience report, how like telling you about the people that are going to your website, if you want to know if they're boys and girls, and if you're doing search engine marketing and you want to do the interest reports, which is what you can further play around with for the AdWords interface, you need to turn that baby on. If you want to enable the user's metrics in the reports, which you definitely want to do, you need to turn that toggle on. So if you remember me talking about, you have a user and their sessions, and then they have interactions. When you go into any of the reports in audience acquisition behavior conversions, the first metric that you have on the right for the users is a session, and you want to go above that. You want to turn this on so you can see the user metric and then the session metric, and that will stop some confusion of people thinking that a session is a user. After that, you want to look at your, still in property settings, go to your tracking info and look at your session settings. Now, I had a question from somebody that was in B2B on remarketing. We will get to that in a second. But if you are thinking about a user and they go onto your website, and some people, I'm not one of these people, but there are some people I know that have a gazillion tabs open and you're not interacting with that website, your default settings will go, do you know what? This person has had no interactions, no hits on this website in 30 minutes. We're going to close it off. We're going to call it a day. Now, you may want to extend the session timeout, or you might want to reduce it. A use case where we have extended the session time was for a client of mine where they did webinars just like Semrush, and you have users that log on, they interact with the website, and they sit still for 40 minutes and do nothing. And then they start interacting again, and then a second session fires, and maybe they convert. Because those conversions are based on sessions, they're actually diluting their conversion report, which is not really a very good thing. When we talk about the campaign timeout, we will pick up on this again in much more detail in session 2, which is on the 2nd of August. Google, when we are looking into acquisition as to who gets credit for that sale, they will look back to a default setting of 6 months. We've changed ours to 12 months because we have a B2B arm of our business and our sales cycle is a little bit longer. And I don't want to chop off a couple of months worth of data where Google's looking back to find, well, where was the source? Because it might be longer than 6 months from when they returned back to the website. Now, this is on a case-by-case basis. You're the one that has to make this decision based on your business and the information that you want to get. But you know, it's there, and this is where it's tucked away. After that, this is a big surprise here. Case surprise, Google is really good at linking up all other Google related products. So if you are using AdWords or Google Search Console or Optimize or Google Tag Manager, there is a whole section here, and provided that you have access to both AdWords and Google Analytics, you should stitch these together. Now, again, we'll talk about this when we look at our tracking on the next session, but you want to look beyond the click. So take AdWords as an example. Yes, you can go into AdWords and see what people are doing, but I want to look into my reports and see people beyond the click. I want to see the journey of users that arrived from different campaigns and dig into that data. I'm not going to get that unless you actually start to pull that in. Same for SEO. I want to stitch in that Google Search Console data into my Google Analytics so I've got it all in one place. Now on to high-level view settings. This seems really obvious, but I see mistakes here. So I had a client who should have done cross-domain tracking and didn't. So they had several floors and they should have had the very big floor. They had lots of windows, lots of views, and there was an inconsistency when I did a basic audit where some of them had the wrong time zone. Now, if you've got a view and you've said only include traffic from the United States of America, you then want to go in here and select the time zone for that particular country and the currency. So you don't make bad choices, because there are reports in analytics where you can see time of day and what time was the session, and it will default to an American time zone. So for our UK view, we've changed it to the United Kingdom. And if you can see on here, we've kept our currency as dollars because we sell in dollars and it's just easier for us. The other thing that I want to flag in your view settings is site search settings. Oh, there's a little bit of a mouthful at this time of day. I'm going to show you the example of what this is, but essentially you have to turn the toggle on and tell Google what your query parameter is. Now, giving you an example, most sites now, this seems to be fashionable at the moment to have a search feature. You've got people that go on your website and start typing things in. I want to know what they're typing into Google, and I can only do that if you turn the toggle on, and when you look at your search string query, you'll either have a letter S or Q, and then you're just going to tell Google what it is, and you will find that gorgeous information, but it only happens the day that you create it, in your behavior report under search terms. Now, I use this to see if I've got a usability problem. Like if I can see that people are desperately searching repeatedly for a particular product or service that should actually be really obvious on my website, I have a user experience problem. I use this to find ideas for content. If people are searching for terms and I'm not writing that content, I'm going to go and write that content. I use it for my AdWords to see how people misspell phrases and terms and start layering it into there. So it's really, really useful information, and it doesn't cost you any money to do, but you do have to tell Google what it is that you want. Next, goals. Now, we will dig into goals in session 3. We're going to layer all this information up. But when we're looking at this purely from an evaluation point of view, do you have goals, yes or no? And you have got the option for each window, for each view, to have 20 goals per view. Yet we find that people either don't have goals, or if they do, they just have the big ones. But more on that later. And the next favorite thing that I like to have in my admin settings is something called content grouping. Now, when you go to your behavior report and you go to all pages and you start looking at this and you think, okay, that doesn't look too drastic, until you go to the bottom right and think, oh, and this is a small site. This is 484 pages. What if this was 48,000 pages or more? Are you going to go into this and work out which ones were the service pages, which are the blog pages? It's just, oh, it's not good. You'll be looking at it and thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be here forever. I'm never going to leave the office. My life is ruined. You know, everything's terrible. It isn't. You can use something called content grouping, and you can have 5 content groups per view. Now, these are the ones that Google demo account has. Now, they're an e-commerce site. So they have grouped their content by brands, by product, and by clothing. And all you need to do to make this happen is tell Google what your information architecture is. Because when you've got it set, and here's what it looks like, instead of looking at all those URLs, of which there were 468, you can just say, can you just show me all the groups of content that fit in the product categories? And now I can very quickly see the 61,000 page views went to apparel. And if I clicked on apparel, it just shows me all of those different URLs. So for people that are in content, people that are in SEO, you want to see where is the share of voice, so to speak, of your website, you need to do content grouping. Now, this is done at view level, which means if you've got more than one view that you're reporting on, you have to do this however many times you've got it. So I've got 5 views, so I have to do this 5 times. My advice to you would be to have one for your website navigation. So if the product, the page contains /blog, it's a blog. If it's /services, it's services. I'm making this very, very simple examples, but you get the idea. And then depending on the business that you're in, you will then decide how you further want to dig into that. This is a client of mine that uses, it's a recruitment company. So they've separated further from the website navigation to different types of clients, different types of jobs and candidate resources. And essentially, you're just using and or statements. So when you want to create your content groupings, and there's loads of YouTube videos, if you just type in how to create a content grouping, you give it a name. So this was one that we did called clients. And then for each of the rules, each of the little folders, so to speak, that we wanted to create, we gave it a name. This was submit a role. And then we told Google what the rules are. The page starts with, ends with, exactly matches this and or this and or this. Hit done, hit save. You're going to get a much easier report to have a look at that data and make things a little bit easier. The next thing that I really don't see many people using, and they really should, because we are a forgetful bunch of people, mainly because we're super busy. I sometimes forget what I had for breakfast or lunch or what I did half an hour ago. And the problem is when you're looking at your reports, there's a lot of spark lines, there's a lot of data, and you might forget what happened. And there's one of the questions we had was from somebody that said, what are the 5 things as an SEO that I should look at? Annotate, my love, annotate. Oh, that could be a song, couldn't it? And these are those tiny little speech bubble kind of marks that you see littered across reports if they are being used, and they're free to use, which is marvelous. All you need to do is click on the little triangle of fun there, and then on the right hand side, click create new annotation, and you have a whopping 160 characters. So we're not writing a dissertation here. It's not essay time. It's for you to either drop a note to yourself, because these can be set to private, or to shared. So think about yourself first. Today, I launched a new website. Today, I changed the meta description on the homepage. Today, we launched a campaign. Today, we tinkered with our admin settings. Today, we were in the news. We had a big boost on Twitter, whatever. Just start annotating what you're doing as a marketing department. Then move beyond that and start annotating what's going on in your company, news launches, press releases, big things that are happening with your company. And then think about what's going on in marketing. Google announces a mobile first index. Google announces whatever, because you want to be isolating your traffic and going, oh, I've gone up, I've gone down. Oh yeah, there's a little note there that says Google updated its algorithm. Have we been boosted or penalized. It's going to help you get there much, much faster. And my final tip on annotations is to think about pestle analysis, political, economical, social, GDPR, Brexit, whatever's happening in the world and laws that are happening. This can have an impact on your business. So start jotting these things down, because when you go into your view settings, it gives you a list. And I've used this to help with my quarterly reviews, monthly reviews. It's just a nice little breadcrumb trail of, oh yes, we did an email campaign, we tinkered with our settings, and it's just going to make things a little bit easier for you to get that aha moment. Last but not least, we have got alerts. Now, I don't think these are used that often either, and I really think they should, because it can get you out of a lot of hot water. Wouldn't it be wonderful if you got a text message or an email if something bad happened or if something good happened? So let's say your organic traffic tanks, like you go down 50%, which is not normal for you. Let's say you fluctuate 10% on any given week. I would really want to get a notification to say something's gone wrong. If my e-commerce conversion rates drop to 0, I want a text message. Is my site down? You don't want to get to the point where people are telling you on Twitter, hey, I'm trying to give you my money and your website's not working. So use these alerts, brainstorm what would be useful for me and how am I going to act on it and who is going to get that. And a word for the wise, when I first did this, I gave loads of alerts and sent them to people that didn't report to me and they didn't like it. So if you are doing an alert and it's going to somebody that's not in your department, maybe give them a little bit of a heads up. So we've gone through a lot, and I know Aidan is going to stop me in a second and we're going to go through some questions to build on what we're going to be doing in the next talk. Because if you've got your house in order, so is it a bungalow or a ranch? Should it be a skyscraper? Should it be a cross domain? Have you thought about the windows and those filters? I had an example with the filters where there was a window called dev and it included the host name dev.website.com, but they didn't exclude that on the one that they reported on. So their revenue figures were always out and they thought marketing was rubbish because the numbers never worked. You want to be thinking about your admin settings and do a good old fashioned audit. Have you turned toggles on? Are you using the features that you should be using? We'll revisit the settings again in the next session, because we're going to be talking about how Google actually tracks your marketing channels and how UTM parameters work and how you need to work on it. But because it can be a little bit overwhelming to do these kind of things, we have a template for you. You're welcome, where you can download this. It's a Google Doc. We'll give you the link at the end, or Aidan will sort out links in a second, where you can go through your account and say, these are my current settings and these are the suggested settings. For example, we only have one window. I think we should have 2 more, and here's why. And then give a nice good old to-do list of what we need to have happening. So if you would like to have a copy of the slides and the templates, and we'll share these with Semrush as well, then you can follow this bit.ly link. We'll post this on the Colouring In Twitter, my Twitter, Aidan's Twitter. But I'm going to close off now and unmute myself for once. I'm going to stop talking, which he doesn't always like, and we can go into some questions. Hopefully, Aidan, we have got some questions. If I can just stop sharing my screen. Has that worked? Yay.
Yes, it has worked. Thank you very much, Jill. And I mean, to your point about do we have any questions? Yes, is the short answer. And lots is the elaboration on that answer. And mountains and mountains and mountains of them, both around the topics, of course, that we talked about in this particular session: filters, the account setup, the checklist, really, as well. But indeed, a few people asking about things that are upcoming in future episodes. However, if we could be so kind, I guess, as to elaborate on a couple of things just from the talk, and a couple of people, of course, particularly coming in through YouTube on this account. The question that came up quite often, and actually it was from Fiona. It was Fiona's first question. Fiona was asking, really, can you separate countries to view the results independently from one another? And I assume, Fiona, given at the stage that you asked that question, you meant with regards to setting up multiple different views, I would assume. But Jill, do you have anything that you would like to add to that?
So apart from going into your reports and creating segments where you can say only include traffic from Canada and see what they're doing, that kind of thing. If there was a strategic reason for you to just isolate that and then dig into audience acquisition behavior, then you would build a view and you'd add a filter to say only include traffic where the country includes Canada or something like that. And then you would just see that information and you can further dig into it.
Thanks. I think the nice thing, and this was always, to be honest, I was talking about this earlier today as well, to reiterate on Jill's point, Google gives you so many opportunities to alter, I guess, the data that you see. And filters, of course, are that first backstop, I guess, the first opportunity to ensure that you, much like Jill described in the talk, there is, of course, a structured element to it. They flow, so the first filter applies first, and it's a little bit like a coffee machine, it trickles down that sort of way. And it ultimately changes the data that you see in your account. So with countries necessarily, it's not always, as Jill says, worthwhile creating a filter when you can just create a segment. So change the lens on which you are looking at the data rather than changing the actual substance of the data itself. Now, in support of that particular question, actually, another one came in as well around those who have multiple domain websites. And particularly with the question around thinking about how can we actually make goals that track across domain conversions and, of course, completions? And I know, Jill, you talked about with using the house model as the lens about those multi-domain properties, but indeed, how would we go about tracking conversions, in your opinion, across domain?
Okay, so if you have successfully set up cross-domain tracking where you are seeing your subdomains and your main domains, then the same rules apply. You're using one whole property to include all of these different domains and subdomains. You will then create a reporting view which shows everything, so you can see people flowing between your blog, .website, account, whatever. And then you can further isolate and say, well, just show me the accounts, just show me the shops, just show me whatever. And then the goals would be exactly as you would have goals. So if a destination goal is on account.website.com, because you've done the cross-domain tracking, you just do as you do. You just go with the URL is thank you. You know, if it's an event goal, you just tell it what's the event that's firing to that particular property. So if you do it, though, as the floors, as I mentioned, you can't build the goals because they're on a different floor. And then Google counts that as another user and another session. And you lose all the value of the source of the traffic that it came from as well. So it really sucks if you should have cross-domain when you don't have it. It's not really very good. But yeah, it's not that difficult to set up. It's just knowing what you're asking for.
Yeah, and again, to add to what Jill says, I think there's always a fear factor element to it, because of course marketing and marketers, and you all know this, YouTube viewers, straying very much into developmental territory. To be a good SEO these days, you need to have a good grip of at least front end coding. So there is that sort of fear. How does regex work? How do I explain myself to a developer? Should I do it myself or should I not touch it? And then sometimes when you're just panicked and you don't want to touch it, frankly, it never gets done. Or even worse, Dev says, I can do it in December 2025 for you. And you say, but I've got a campaign running this week. And they say, tough. So it is a common kind of recurring theme. And a couple of you actually asked around goals and e-commerce kind of to spin on that idea of cross-domain tracking, because of course e-commerce sites by their very nature are fairly complex, should I say, particularly when you get a very large inventory and you've got a lot of products and you're doing a lot of changing. But really, we got a big question around from Tom. So Tom, here's your question. For a new e-commerce company who's using Google Analytics together with Mixpanel, which of course is a separate tool, all feeding into a segment, how do I make sure everything is set up correctly? And how do I create a good dashboard to review everything daily? Short answer on that one, and I'm going to take this for myself because I love reporting so much. It's unreal. It's actually pathetic how much I love reporting. You can feed a segment in a GA just like you would do absolutely anything else. But the question actually really is rather, why do you need the dashboard in the first place? What is the point? And we talk about it, and Jill talk about this a lot because we don't really have much of a life in truth. We talk about the concept of post-it note reporting. So who is going to get this actual report? And you might break it up in a simplistic way between the CMO, the CEO, the CFO, these multiple divisions within your company, or perhaps you report to multiple different teams. You are trying to identify who is getting this report, where does this metric live, why am I reporting on this? And we often like to use, because we love Google Analytics so much, Data Studio, which is a separate tool again within the Google Suite. But it still says plugs in very nicely into Google Analytics. It plays very well with Google Analytics because it's kind of in the title, Google Data Studio. And indeed, it's something that we will talk a little bit about later in the series, absolutely. But we use that concept of, well, what is the number? Why are we reporting on? Who is it for? What does it mean? To base our measurement plan, on which there actually is a future template for you in that particular regard, Tom and Co. Now, a couple of other ones. Filter question from Daphne, because of course we haven't actually looked too much at the filter questions, more segments, less filters. Jill, one for you really here. Daphne says she's a home business, so doesn't go into Starbucks, so to speak, but uses the laptop at home. Is the IP that she would add always the same since she's in one location only? Not 100% sure. What is, of course, the best tool to find one's IP ad? And Daphne, just for context sake, there are loads of tools that will tell you your IP address, including within your own operating system as well. But Jill, your advice for someone like Daphne, who is a remote worker, who is a freelancer, who I imagine gets around a little bit, Daphne, even if you're not at home. Hopefully you work in an art gallery now and then with a little bit of company. But what are your thoughts, Jill?
So you can just Google, like, what is my IP address, and it'll tell you what it is. It is going to depend. So if I'm working from home, I use Virgin, and my IP address changes depending on where the pumps are feeding in the I don't even know how it works, like how the internet works, how I get my data. One day I'm in Bristol, one day it says that my IP address is somewhere else. It can change depending on your provider. So I'm using a provider that fluctuates a little bit. If she knows that she's on a hard IP address, then she just needs to Google, like, what is my IP address, and just keep a watch on it. For some, as I mentioned at the beginning, you might just have to let it go. It's more of an issue when you've got bigger teams, bigger offices, where you've got lots and lots of users that are really, really messing up your data because you didn't take out the staff. So for one person, like for me and you, Aidan, I'm not going to bother with your flat. You're not going to bother with my house. So yeah, I'm going to worry slightly less about that one user that is the same user that seems to be my best user, but I know it's me.
To add to that a little bit, Daphne, to be fair, because of course the whole hot desking thing is really popular at the moment. We've had a few people, of course, talk about this notion of filtering and excluding one's own IP. And yes, to be honest, it is used for the most part for excluding the marketing team in the agency and your multinational corporation as such. But because we're all hot desking more, we're all using shared IP addresses. So if you were in a WeWork, for instance, or if you're in any other of the other shared buildings, you have a single solitary IP address, unless you pay for an individual one. And then there's a problem, because that could be a big building full of clients, but you don't know because you share an IP address. And if you were to exclude yourself in that context, then of course you could be excluding actually a fairly large amount of data, depending on how much networking you do and how you get to know the businesses around you. And Jill and I, and of course Jill will probably back this up, we know everybody around us within about a 3-mile radius, because we never shut up. But I mean, that's just the truth of the matter, so it's pretty important. Indeed, viewing a lot of pages yourself, Daphne, just to follow up on your question, because we're having a live conversation, of course, in YouTube. There is always that element of thinking about how accurate things are. And if you exclude yourself, of course, it's going to be that little bit more accurate, I guess. But if you're just testing to see if something works, it's not going to be major unless you're clicking refresh about 500 times a day. So it's more of an issue for the larger marketing teams or those larger multi-kind of destination marketing teams as well. So that's something that does frequently come up. Now, to pick up kind of one final question before we wrap up, and we'll both kind of probably throw our weight behind this one a little bit. And because of course Semrush or SEMrush, depending on where you're at in the world, is an awesome search tool, and it seems to get better absolutely every day. And that's of course no sell. We're big fans of the tool, which is why we're here. Google Analytics is overwhelmingly huge as well on top of that. So we had a few questions really on what are the top 5 things as an SEO or as an SEM. So that's of course working in search engine optimization or indeed search engine marketing that we should care about and should look at daily. Now, my obsession, and Jill will probably add her own spin to this because she's got her own opinion too, like everybody in this world. Traffic is a big issue. Monthly recurring traffic is another big issue. I'm obsessed with looking at AdWords reports in the acquisition channels. I go completely crazy for keywords in Search Console, also under the acquisition reports if you integrate them. I know Jill is a little bit more interested in the content end of things, but I don't know if you would add anything to that. Thinking about search marketers specifically, Jill, what are your go-to daily, day in, day out reports that you really, really like? Just to close this off.
Okay, so as you said, with any of the reports, always for content or context. Sorry, I can't speak today. This month versus that month, this year versus last year, this July versus last year's July, just to give some context on any changes. Using annotations as well. So if there have been updates to algorithm updates or whatever, that's going to help me understand what is moving on the lines to try and help me get there a little bit faster. I like to use assisted conversions. So we'll touch on this next session, but in the analytics acquisition report, 100% of the credit goes to the last non-direct channel, which means, like football, because the World Cup's on, whoever scores the goal, they get 100% of the credit. Do you sack off the rest of your team? No, that would be dumb. So you need to go down to the assisted conversions report. You need to go down and see the time lag report. How long does it take people to convert? Can you make that faster? What are the top paths to purchase? Building segments, trying to see the difference between the brand terms and the non-brand terms, going into content and using the content grouping. Maybe even, and we're not doing a webinar on it, custom dimensions, adding more information into analytics to get more bang for your buck. But essentially it's whatever the objective is of that business, and that changes depending on the stage the businesses are in. If you're in early startup, you've just got to prove that business model works. They want traction. But when you're in an acquisition mode, it's all about getting a better return on investment. So it's just wherever you are, SEM, SEO, email, whatever, focus on the monthly changes, the yearly changes, look at your annotations, look at the assisted conversions, try and paint a picture. But also, what is it that you're trying to do? Like, what's the needle that needs to be moved this month? And focus on the reports that are going to give you that answer. Yeah.
Thanks, JQ. Just as a reminder, everybody, a lot of the things we talked about in this session and why we talk about the stuff in this session, why we did this session first. Why didn't we do tracking first? Because, of course, you cannot retroactively apply a lot of stuff in Google Analytics. It only starts filtering, tracking, managing from now. So you've got a little bit of work to do before the next session, which is on the 2nd of August. And as Jill says, we're going to be talking about tracking at that point. So we're going to be heavily investing our time into what happened and when and why, and so on, and making sure we can validate our marketing, both in terms of effectiveness, get pay rises, keep clients, all that sort of stuff. We're starting to move into that particular territory. But that only works if the things in this session are in play, which is why we've created a template for you, which we will share with you momentarily. Of course, naturally, as we said, the next session is on the 2nd of August. We will, on both my Twitter, Jill's Twitter, the Coloring In Department Twitter, give you access to the template and to the deck. And indeed also, of course, Semrush will be giving you the recording and also access to the deck. So you simply cannot miss it, basically. We're going to just Tommy gun the world with templates and decks so that you don't miss any of the information and you can get that checklist rolling as soon as is possible. But for now, and indeed, we have plenty more to say, of course. For this particular episode, thank you so much for joining us for episode 1 of this analytics series for Semrush. It's been our great pleasure to take your questions and just talk about analytics. We enjoy it. We hope you do too. And indeed, we hope to see a great many of you when we're talking about tracking on the 2nd of August. But for now, fond farewell from both myself and from Jill. Jill, give a goodbye wave. Goodbye wave. Have a great day wherever you're at in the world. Indeed, take care and best of luck with setting up your Google Analytics account.